Okay, so you said you were a creative writing major?
I was actually a history major and an English minor and a Russian minor, so I was double minored, and my focus in English was creative writing.
Awesome.
Focus in history was intellectual history, so it was a lot of writing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
it's like writing about stuff instead of just writing about myself. But I loved writing about myself, but still.
What first drew you to writing? Is it anyone in particular?
There's a couple stories on that. But I mean, when I was before I went to college, like the summer before I went to college, I had never really written before except for term papers and that kind of thing. And then I got a Brother word processor back before computers were the rage, because I'm 700 years old, and so I would just sit up at night, alone in my room, and I'd write really bad poetry, and that kind of got me into it. And then I started writing papers for history in college, and I was in graduate classes my freshman year because my mentor professor really took to my writing. And then by my junior year, I got into the creative writing program, and I took some workshop classes and got, crazy in those, writing about, sex and violence and abuse and all this other crap, and memoirs, and and then I was always really big into music, and so my first real writing gig was doing sort of really creative music reviews, that kind of stuff, for a weekly that was run out of the Daily in Tallahassee. And I became the editor of that, and since then it's just kind of snowballed into all of this glory that you see before you today.
What kind of music do you like?
Old music, in the 80s, basically. I mean, I'm 40, so yeah. So
you don't look it.
Yeah, well, thank you. But no, I like new music. I mean, I like words in music. So if it's got good words, then I'm happy.
I feel the same way. Yeah. Your articles are often controversial. Do you receive much criticism?
I think I get more support than I do criticism. I mean, I think that there's people who choose to communicate with the weekly or with me are typically fired up by the kind of stuff that we're doing, because we're trying to get under people's skin a little bit. In the age of Facebook and all of that, I can see a lot more of the criticism that isn't directly thrown at me, but now I think that the party lines are pretty well drawn. So I mean, you're going to have staunch Republicans not liking this liberal gay guy that much. But I've got a thick skin, so.
Yeah. Do you have any way you respond to it?
Not on message boards. But if it's a valid criticism, if I get something wrong, I'm more than happy to research it and retract, and also to discuss something if somebody has a deeper perspective. What's interesting about this job is that a lot of times you are sort of voicing the underdog opinion on things. I mean, when we're out of political season, say if I'm writing about something like sex offender legislation, I found it really interesting to get into like sex offender camps and talk to some of these people, because you generalize what people are a lot. A sex offender, there's sex offenders in my neighborhood. You can look up dots on TV or on the screen of your computer, and a lot of them are just looking at porn online, and things will pop up, and everyone's got their stories, but is that the end of that person's life? Should that person have to live on the other side of the tracks in a trailer for the rest of their lives and not be able to get a job? No, I don't think so, So, I don't know, rather than knee-jerk controversy, I really just like to flesh out human stories, and so it's really kind of hard to criticize somebody's story,
It's true, the individual.
Yeah, I mean, we've got laws and mandates that sort of blanket everything as a binary code, but when you really get into journalism, or you really get into writing or interviewing people, you realize that everybody's story is true to them, So
that's the more fascinating part of it.
Yeah.
What would you consider to be your role in the LGBT community?
I'm loved and hated in the LGBT community. No, I think it's a pretty strong role. I mean, I'm a very openly gay person who does not work for a gay company, does not work for a gay publication. So I'm pushing boundaries from within the system, maybe more so than some of the people that maybe Watermark are or whatever. And I did run for mayor. I was the first LGBT mayoral candidate in Orlando. And I am at a lot of like gay fundraisers and gay events, and I speak my mind. I think that for the most part I have a pretty good position. I would never say that I'm a leader in the gay community because I'm not wealthy, and I think that leadership has a cost. I mean, because you really do need the money to move these campaigns forward, and in journalism you really don't make that. And so I'm able to keep the distinction between being a sort of an advocate, because advocacy also has a cost, and being a reasonably objective journalist, by virtue of the fact that I'm poor.
I like what you said, working within the system. That's really awesome to try and change it. Good. Okay, so, because it has to be brought up, how important do you think this election is for the community?
I am terrified of this election. I've gotten to the point that, and you brought up criticism before, and I've got 3,000 followers on my Facebook because it's sort of a brand in its own right, and I've gotten to the point that I actually am deleting comments, and I'm personally messaging people if they come up and say anything pro Romney or something really ill thought out about Obama being black, Obama being Muslim, about gay people fucking up the ass, and that's all we want in our, is that kind of privilege, a special right to fuck up the ass, I think that this election season, probably more than any other, at least to me, has shown me a side of humanity that I don't want to know exists, and I kind of can't wait till it crawls back into its park, and disappears.
Way to say it. Yeah.
I would agree with that statement. Okay, so I feel like this.
We kind of covered that. But...
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I feel like we did cover that. All right, so what would you say to someone interested in becoming involved with the community, like as an activist, or where would one start, kind of thing? I'm really great friends with a lot of activists that work at real ground level. The people that organize now, the people at Equality Florida, that are getting into communities, knocking on doors, hearing people's problems, advocating for them, connecting them with attorneys, connecting them with whomever they need to, professionals within industries to help them. And, I think that's an amazing way to get involved, is to find local organizations that speak to your concerns, whether it be foreclosure, whether it be, gay or lesbian rights, whether it's, strictly politics. You can get involved with the Florida Democratic Party, or the Orange County Democratic Party, or Seminole Dems, or Republicans, if that's if that's the bread you butter. But, yeah, I think that it's just... There's a difference between just reading stuff on blogs and feeling like you're a champion, and then getting out and actually doing something about it. And you really feel it when you go home at night. I feel like I'm able to get some of that from voicing people's concerns in a broadcasted way. But a lot of the young activists that I know are so impressive, because you learn so much by actually looking at life at a young age and seeing it for what it is, seeing how far you can fall and how high you can go, and not just believing this trajectory that everything's going to take care of itself, because, it's the more you know, really. So, it's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are going to get a little bit more personal, and then again,
Let's do
I just want to reiterate, like, if you don't want to answer,
I can give you my therapist's phone number.
I might need that.
Where did you grow up?
I was born in Sarasota, but I grew up mostly, at least junior in high school, in Boca Raton, Florida.
I'm from South
Boca
Florida.
High. But before that, my parents divorced when I was like 4 or 5, and we moved all over Florida. So I lived in Panama City Beach, Jacksonville, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Coral Springs, Plantation, regular Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and then Boca. When my mom remarried, and then boom, it was the 80s. So, yeah, I've been in Florida pretty much my whole life. I've had a couple forays. I tried to make it in New York, like everybody does in their 20s, and I actually tried to make it in Boston, too, and both times I was just too cold, and it was too competitive, and there's something about Florida that at least speaks my language because I come from it, so I feel more comfortable here.
Try to make it in writing?
Yeah. In writing or sales, I just wanted to be in the publishing industry, and I got to my third interview at Newsweek in the advertising sales department, and I was giving a presentation. In the middle of it, my nose was running. It was it was snowing outside, and I just looked at them. I'm like, I can't do this. This is all a lie. I've gotten this far completely lying to you. I'm a liar. And I walked out, and then I called my mom crying and said, I need to come home. I'm out of money. So I moved back.
So how'd you move from Boca to Orlando?
I went from Boca to Tallahassee to Florida State, and then I stayed there a few years after I graduated from '05 to '07 as editor of that alt weekly that I was talking about. And then I had a friend who lived down here, and I had kind of run my course up there, and so my friend offered, he was like, well, why don't you just get out of that town? And I did. Like, I just came down and stayed with him for a few weeks, and I ended up moving down, so. And then I sent a letter to the weekly, like in November of '97, saying that I was in town, and somebody who worked here at the time had heard of me from Tallahassee because she had family up there, and she's like, "This is a great writer," and so it was kismet, and then I just ended up starting writing for this paper.
Nice and easy.
Yeah, it wasn't really easy because I had to work at Barnes and Noble at the same time. I was just freelance at the time, but yeah, worked my way up.
Stuff. Okay, so how do you identify, I guess, the question.
There's so many more labels
right.
out here now.
Yeah. I mean, if in strict terms, I'm a single gay man, a Democrat, and a writer, and a blonde, and a bottom. No, and no, I don't know. I mean, I've always kind of been an outsider in some sense, but an outsider that's very entertaining to the inside people, and so because I'm not terribly offensive as a human being, I'm more like somebody that's like fun to be around for a while, and then maybe you really don't want to take him home with you because it could just be a mess, So, yeah, I mean, I'm just a grown-up gay man. I mean, I guess to go into more personal, I'm newly single because my partner took his life in April, and we've been together for 11 years, and he was suffering from HIV, and so I see a lot of the nuances and the insecurities and the pain in the community, and so if I laugh about it, it's just because I'm trying to put a smile on it, and that's one of the reasons I've written my whole life is to kind of escape from pain, and so, that struggle continues, and I don't think I'm alone in that, so.
Definitely not. Yeah. So did you have to come out at any point?
I did. Yeah, I kind of knew I was gay. I mean, I let the program director of a Miami radio station blow me off when I was 15 for a Duran Duran t-shirt. And, but I still had girlfriends up through my freshman year of college. And then I was working at a record store, and a girlfriend of mine brought in her boyfriend, and he flirted with me, and I ended up going home with him. And then 2 days later, we were living together. And I called my mom, and she did the whole, it's just a phase, da-da-da-da. My stepbrother had just died of AIDS a month before. And so there, the sort of, I guess the narrative has changed, but at that point, it's almost to be forgiven. I mean, if they had been dealing with, he came out because he had AIDS, and then I come out immediately as he's dying, and they didn't want me to be hurt, but, it was obviously something I knew for a very long time, and so we didn't talk for a couple years, and my mom sent me a conciliatory watch a couple years after that, and I stopped calling her Carol, and started calling her Mom again, so yeah, we get along fine now, but it was as rocky as every other story.
Who have been your biggest supporters?
My biggest supporters? I guess the people, like the professor I had mentioned early on, his name's Neil Jumonville. He heads the history department at FSU still, and I actually got a chance to meet up with him at a legislative session a couple years ago, and he told me how proud he was of me still, and I was like, why are you reading me? He's like, I use your materials in my class, and it was pretty awesome to hear. But I get support from, I live off of support, emotional support, and I think I almost require it at this point, like I have to be sort of a local celebrity. I hate to put it like that, but I'm very needy like that, but I'm also very giving, and so it balances out. But I only get in supportive situations professionally, and I think that helps a lot. I mean, everybody here is my friend as well as my coworker. When everything went bad for me this year, they were all there. The night that it happened, they were at my house. So I let people into my life pretty openly, but I expect them to be there for me as I would be for them. So. Yeah, the world is my supporters.
There you go.
So, yeah.
Who inspires you?
I think the people that inspire me have changed over the years. I mean, I think depending on what you need at a certain time, early on it was, you know, lyrics of cryptic lyrics of like Simon Le Bon or like the crazy hair of Cyndi Lauper or something like that. And as I, you know, got older, it was, you know, Kerouac and Ginsberg and Ken Kesey and then it was, you know, James Baldwin and you know, the civil rights movement and you know, all of these, the sort of the panoply of characters that inspire everybody. But what inspires me now are you know, are sort of people that aren't regular names, but just people who are really trying. And it's really interesting to know, like my parents will say to me, all politicians are liars. But I'm friends with some politicians and they're amazing people and they know so much and there's such like a wealth of information for me to draw from. And I find that inspiring, that you can still be a human and still hold all that information and be that controversial of a figure and have to, you know, go out and win votes. I mean, in politics, politicians in general, the good ones inspire me a lot now. Even like your Debbie Wasserman Schultz, you know, or your Nancy Pelosi, or people who are always taking hell, but they still come out and they'll just give hell right back. And it's researched hell, you know?
That's really important. I think so many people forget that there are those politicians who are actually trying.
Right, and I'm inspired by Barack Obama. I'll flat out say it. I mean, if I watching these debates, I mean, the first one, notwithstanding, but at the same point, how would you feel if somebody was coming at you with just lie after lie after lie when you both had been in camps preparing for what each other was going to say? How does somebody get away with being in front of 57 million people and saying complete mistruths on television, you know, things he never said before, or the opposite of things that he said before? And the fact that in the last two debates, you know, even though there is code language on both sides, the dog whistles of you know of the base, trying to get them up, when you hear Obama speak, and people fault him for this, but to me it's great because I still relate to this kind of speech, but like professorial speech where you don't second guess it. You're not like, oh, there's something behind that. He's speaking in facts, you know. He's somebody who is way smarter than anybody who's ever been in that office before. He's a black man who's overcome a lot, and he's a wonderful human being, you know, who is able to admit that he had shortcomings on the gay issue in the beginning, but in our Western culture, a lot of people have that issue. At least he was willing to work through it, you know? And I think he's worked through it before our very eyes. I mean, I was a Hillary Clinton supporter in the beginning, but he's impressed me incredibly, so I don't know how I got on that. I'm obviously in campaign mode, but
he's not at this point.
I know.
All right, and then the last question, kind of a fun one. If you could sit down and have coffee with any person, living or dead, who would they be?
I feel like that might have just been answered.
I know, right? Yeah, I know. I actually was going to try and arrange that on this
really?
on this cycle, but then I had too much going on, obviously, in this year. But yeah, I think Barack Obama would definitely be up there, as would Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. But living or dead,
it's definitely a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of my heroes over the years, whether they were musical heroes or movie heroes or any of that kind of thing, and a lot of times they've been wonderful. More often than not, they're wonderful. So, you know, I kept a bit of a bucket list in my head, and like David Bowie is one that I have yet to ever speak to. So yes, I'd like to speak to David Bowie because I think he'd have something to say. But yeah, I don't think I'd like to speak to any people who are passed out of their context because it's hard to understand, to imagine what, you know, even Walt Whitman would say right now. So
That's true.
But yeah, so we'll go with Obama then.
All right.